In 2003, when the Hulk was being made into a feature film for theaters, it was pretty big. The trailers would rarely show you what the Hulk looked like, and all we got to see was the concept art. Now when the movie opened in theaters, it did pretty bad. Not only did it have the biggest drop in ticket sales at the box office, but it also got mixed reviews from critics. Some critics like Roger Ebert would defend the film for being a more mature comic book movie, but generally people didn't like the Hulk's design or the movie's pace. The only thing that became really big were those Hulk hands, which was probably the one thing that got back the movie's money. So what do I think? Is it that terrible movie that the general audience makes it out to be, or is there some value to it? Well, if you had to ask me, I can safely tell you that it's a guilty pleasure. There are a lot of good things in the movie that make me more accepting for its flaws. While those flaws may be very big, there aren't that many problems in general. Sometimes it makes me contemplate if the film is a guilty pleasure or if it's underrated. So let's start with the story. David Banner, which is a nod to the TV show, does experiments for the military to make super soldiers on himself, which are passed down to his child Bruce. But because the military shuts him down, and having felt that he has turned his son into a monster, David attempts to kill his son and instead takes the life of his wife, which was defending Bruce. Having grown up in foster care and years of suppressing the memories, Bruce studies damaged tissue repair with nanobots and gamma radiation. However, an accident in the lab causes him to get bombarded with radiation and nanobots. Mixing his father's tampered genes, the repressed childhood trauma, and the accident causes him to turn into a green monster with a mind of its own while under emotional stress. But wait, there's more. Bruce's ex-girlfriend's father is also the general that has Bruce's father locked away and wants him under custody for suspiciously working on similar experiments as him. And on top of that, his father comes back to see his work and take it for himself. One of the criticisms that I could and could not understand at the same time was how people got bored of this. It wasn't like characters weren't doing anything for the whole film. Just look at what I mentioned above. That's enough for a 2-hour movie. I guess it came to people's expectations for what to expect as far as comic book movies go. More action and more of the Hulk smashing stuff. To be fair, it wasn't like the Hulk was barely in it. I'd say he's given enough screen time. At the same time, there's the complaint that it's not what people expected the Hulk to look like. Probably something more weighted and less like Shrek. Nothing wrong with feeling this way, but here's the thing. The Incredible Hulk is a giant green monster the size of a bus. It wasn't even that noticeable since a majority of the time he's covered in the shadows. Obviously, this isn't something that can exist in real life, and as far as what was portrayed on screen, it's what I always imagined the character to look like. Were there times where certain elements would have worked better on comic page? Well, there's moments like this that do take me away, but it's for one scene. On top of that, there are comic book split frames in this film. Oh my god, if I had the power to re-edit this film, I would take them out. If you want to tell the story of a comic book character while reminding you that it comes from a comic book, that's fine, more power to you. But it really takes me away from something dark and making it as campy as Scott Pilgrim, especially when the film was going for a vintage monster movie approach. And as far as the complaints go, those are all that I can think of. I think everything else outweighs the bad. Like, take this score by Danny Elfman. Seriously, I could listen to that all day. Another thing I liked was the lighting choices. Certain scenes that would be a colored glow for the character that brings me back to a lot of horror films. And speaking of the monster movie motif, ever notice how the Hulk fights in the shadows or appears mostly at night? Outside of this being a blatant reference to the comics, it adds to the mysterious atmosphere of the character, making him what Stan Lee originally intended, Marvel's version of Frankenstein's monster or Jekyll and Hyde. And if that's not enough, the Hulk doesn't even have a name. Only once Bruce refers to the Hulk as a Hulk, but most of the time he's called Banner's Green Friend or something along those lines, increasing the alterity of the character. The acting in this film ranges from good to terrific. While I can't complain about the people that have donned the role of Bruce Banner, since each one was good to their own respect, Eric Bana is my favorite, especially since he's the closest to representing a scientist who thinks of himself while struggling with a split personality. There are moments before and after Bruce turns green where he still acts like the Hulk, like in this scene.
sent his dogs, didn't he? But I killed them.
It's subtle, but that's not Bruce Banner talking. You could see him struggling as if there are two minds bound to the same body, which is exactly what the Hulk is all about. Unlike the other heroes who put on masks and essentially are themselves, the Hulk and Bruce Banner could not be any more different from each other. While all the other characters who've donned the role, I feel as if Banner was the best at getting this done. If that's not enough to convince you, there are two minds struggling in the same body. There are scenes like this, which even the haters will admit is one of their favorite moments.
Puny human.
Do I even need to tell you what I love about the rest of the cast? Sam Elliott as Thunderbolt Ross is awesome. When you hear him taunt Bruce for trying to get his daughter Betty, you could not have gotten a better actor suited for the role of the belligerent general. Even Betty, who nonetheless is played by the gorgeous Jennifer Connelly, she does a lot trying to figure out how to help Bruce in understanding his father, played by Nick Nolte. At some points it's counteractive, but the effort is more than you could say than the earlier portrayals of Betty in the comics. And don't get me started with Liv Tyler. Nick Nolte as David Banner was neat, serving as both a physical and mentally overbearing baddie to Bruce and the Hulk. He's both a mad scientist and someone Bruce could have easily become if he cared more for himself. As a fanboy, would I have changed some things? I guess it would have to do with the villain. Don't get me wrong, I thought making David Banner into the Absorbing Man was fine. While not a regular Hulk baddie, he fights him on occasion in the comics. It even goes with David's obsession by taking back what's rightfully his. That, and the fight is pretty awesome and lends itself to some neat imagery like this. But yeah, the Absorbing Man is the last villain you would think of having the Hulk to fight. Like looking at Nick Nolte, would you imagine him going with the Maestro instead? And how about the scene where he absorbs his own blood? Doesn't it seem like he's going to become the Abomination? Well, shoulda, coulda, woulda, but as it was okay. And now there's a thing that a lot of people will nag me if I didn't include mentioning. The Gamma Dogs. Yes, they were in the comics, and it was goofy seeing the Hulk fight a mutated poodle. But you know what? I thought the scene had some fine action. It really didn't matter as much, as well considering that they were fighting in the shadows, which is another thing I admire in the movie. That, and I think the movie could afford to be silly. Even for as dark and gritty as Christopher Nolan's Batman movies were, I can tell you that the last film had a cornball moment or two. Why can't this movie do so? Its main character is the Jolly Green Giant in purple spandex. When I first saw the movie in theaters, it was a year after seeing Spider-Man, which for me was my favorite movie of the year. I was in the 5th grade, what could you say? However, when the Hulk came out, I became obsessed with this character. Unlike Spider-Man, which I liked and read a little about the character, the Hulk made me read all the comics I could find. Maybe it was the fact that for once there was a superhero who wasn't really the hero and was more like this social outcast that really appealed to me. And even as I grow older, somehow I still enjoy seeing this film. More so than I did as a 6th grader. Does that mean I like it more than the recent movie with Edward Norton? Well, yes and no. Don't get me wrong, the movie has more coherent action and I like the way they rendered the Hulk to look like Mike Deodato Jr.'s illustration. My problem was that it was pretty standard and it only seemed like a placeholder to keep us in anticipation for a better Hulk in the Avengers. Something about this movie just felt soulless. Like, they would make references to the comics, but they'd be put there just for fan service. It's like Lou Leterrier read excerpts from the most popular comics that came out in the last 10 years, copied and pasted them into the movie. Like the scene where the Hulk holds Betty in a cave during a thunderstorm, that was taken verbatim from Hulk Grey, unrespectively one of the many moving moments in the comics that wasn't given justice to screen. This made me groan as much as Tabit getting blown to bits. At least with Ang Lee and the writers of Hulk 2003, I think they had more of an appreciation for the character and his history while having some creative freedom with their interpretation. The origin with the abusive father and the fact that he believed he created a monster was taken from the Crossroads storyline. Another element was how Peter David built upon the multiple personality disorder, which is why the Savage Hulk, as the fans know him, is the childlike personality that acts on rage, when in essence is his own character as much as Bruce is. So I guess what I'm trying to go for is that this movie may have some flaws, but I don't want people to be under the impression that the recent Hulk movie is the default Hulk movie to go to. I think there's some value to the earlier film that you'll appreciate, especially since it felt like it took itself as seriously as it needed to be. So the film may have its haters, and the film might also have its fans. You could put me in the fan category. And I do recommend you check it out if you want to see a different but worthwhile comic book adaptation.